You won't believe these 20 daily jobs that once shaped society but have completely vanished. From human alarm clocks to chimney sweeps, these careers were once essential, but today, they're nothing more than forgotten history. Before lamplighters, people lit the streets of cities. Every night, these men and women went from lamp to lamp and lit gas-powered lights to guide people safely through the night. They did this every day, coming back every morning to burn them. When electric lighting came along, gas lamps lost their use. As soon as towns switched to automated lighting, the jobs went away almost overnight. Some historic places still use modern lamplighters for style and tradition's sake. But while lamplighters faded away, they weren't the only workers affected by new technology. As clocks became more reliable, another once essential job vanished too. Long before alarm clocks were pretty cheap, people hired knocker-uppers to wake them up for work. These human alarm clocks tapped on windows with long sticks to make sure their customers didn't fall asleep too early. Some even got to higher floors with P-guns. Mechanical alarm clocks that were cheap and reliable started to take the place of personal wake-up calls. Some knockers hired their own staff, so there was an alarm clock on the alarm clock. With people now waking up on their own, the world of morning deliveries was also changing. One of the most familiar sights in early mornings was the milkman, but even he couldn't escape modernization. For decades, the neighborhood milkman brought fresh milk in glass bottles to people's doors every morning. Before people could cool their milk at home, families could only get fresh milk every day. The supermarket and refrigerator made it easy to store milk at home, so it wasn't necessary to have it delivered every day. Even though most milkmen are no longer around, a few small dairies still deliver for customers who miss them. From lighting streets to waking people up and delivering fresh milk, these jobs once seemed irreplaceable. But as technology advanced, entire professions faded away, just like these next ones. There were a lot of rats in towns in the past. Before modern pest control, rats got into homes, markets, and sewers and spread diseases like the plague. As a result, people who catch rats became essential workers. With chemicals, traps, and sometimes just their bare hands, these experts got rid of mice before they could spread disease. Some even carried live rats in cages to show how hard they were working. Rat catchers were not needed full-time because there were professional exterminators, rodenticides, and better cleaning. Rodents are kept out of cities today with locked trash cans, chemical treatments, and ultrasonic repellents. Some people who caught rats used trained dogs to chase them out of small spaces. It would make the job easier if these quick, brave animals got rid of the rats. As rat catchers worked to keep cities clean, another group of workers battled the elements to provide an everyday necessity, ice. It was hard to keep food fresh before refrigerators came along. Real ice is what you need. Ice cutters worked in terrible winter weather to cut huge chunks out of frozen lakes and rivers. They were stored in cool warehouses and then brought to homes, restaurants, and companies by wagon or boat. With the invention of refrigerators and ice-making machines, gathering ice became unnecessary. Now anyone can make ice at home any time of the year. Ice was once seen as a luxury item. In the 1800s, companies sent frozen blocks from the US to hot places like India and Cuba. The ice trade even had a black market where illegal ice was sold by traders to avoid paying taxes. While ice cutters ensured people had a way to keep things cool, another group of workers made sure people could stay connected. It wasn't as easy to make a call before fast dialing and smartphones. You had to press a number. You had to call a switchboard operator who would connect you by putting wires into big screens in person. These people answered thousands of calls every day, making long-distance talks possible. The most important thing became technology. As direct dialing and automated phone exchanges became more common, switchboard workers became less useful. By the 1980s, computers had pretty much replaced most of them. Back in the day, some operators listened in on talks and shared information. Others used their job to spread stories or even listen in on conversations about famous people. While switchboard operators connected voices across cities, another group of workers helped people move between floors, long before self-service elevators became the norm. These days, All you have to do to get into an elevator is press a button. Early elevators, on the other hand, weren't self-driving. People had to physically stop at floors, control the speed of the lift by hand, and calm down people who were scared. They also had to make sure trips went smoothly and that dips didn't happen out of the blue. Automatic elevators took the place of needing human workers. By the middle of the 20th century, most towns needed elevators to have sensors and emergency stop buttons to make them safe for people to use on their own. Some high-end hotels and historic buildings still hire elevator workers to give their guests an old-fashioned, high-class experience. From catching rats and cutting ice to connecting calls and running elevators, these jobs were once everyday necessities. But as technology advanced, they slowly disappeared. And they're not the only ones. Many more professions have faded into history as the world evolved. Before automatic pin setters came along, bowling lanes needed people to move the pins every time someone threw. These men, most of the time young men, sat at the end of the lane and dove for flying bowling balls while quickly rearranging the pins for the next round. This work was hard on the body and had to be done quickly, with quick reactions and focus. In the 1940s and 1950s, automatic pin setters changed the industry by getting rid of the need for people to do the work. Bowling lanes got better, and putting pins almost went away overnight. This job was very dangerous. Pins and bowling balls sometimes hurt the pin setters because they were moving so fast. A lot of them had cuts, bruises, and even broken fingers from their jobs. As bowling alleys modernized, another job that relied on nature also began to disappear: collecting leeches for medical use. Believe it or not, there was a time when doctors thought removing blood could cure almost anything. From headaches to fevers, bloodletting was a common medical practice. But where did the leeches come from? Leech collectors waded into marshes, ponds, and swamps, letting the bloodsuckers attach to their legs. Once full, the leeches were sold to doctors, who used them in treatments. As modern medicine advanced, doctors realized that bloodletting wasn't the cure, all they once thought. The demand for leeches declined, and the job of leech collecting faded away. Leeches still have medical uses today. In rare cases, surgeons use them to improve blood circulation after reattachment surgeries, proving that nature's tiny bloodsuckers aren't completely obsolete. While leech collectors played a strange role in medicine, another set of workers spent their days crafting newspapers letter by letter. Before computers and digital printing, newspapers, books, and flyers were created one letter at a time. Typesetters arranged tiny lead letters into place to form sentences and paragraphs, carefully aligning them before pressing ink onto paper. It was a slow, painstaking process that required precision and attention to detail. The rise of digital printing and computer-based publishing completely replaced manual typesetting. By the late 20th century, newspapers no longer needed workers to arrange letters by hand. From dodging flying bowling pins to wading through swamps for leeches and assembling newspapers by hand, these jobs once played a vital role in society, but with each technological leap, they slowly disappeared into history. Before electricity and diesel engines, coal-powered steam engines ruled transportation and industry. Trains, ships, and factories all depended on massive furnaces that needed a constant supply of coal to generate power. That's where coal stokers came in. Their job was simple, yet exhausting, shoveling coal into fiery furnaces for hours on end to keep engines running. These workers labored in sweltering conditions, often deep inside steamships and locomotives, where temperatures could soar to unbearable levels. The job required physical strength, endurance, and the ability to withstand intense heat and choking coal dust. By the mid-20th century, advancements in diesel engines, electricity, and automated fueling systems eliminated the need for human stokers. Steam-powered locomotives were phased out, and modern ships no longer required men to shovel coal by hand. It was so hot in the boiler rooms that some stokers baked bread on their shovels. That's right, without an oven, they could simply hold a loaf over the raging furnace, and it would be fully cooked in minutes. The life of a coal stoker was tough, but at least they weren't working with human waste, unlike the next unfortunate group of workers. Before modern air fresheners and plumbing, cities were full of foul odors. Streets were lined with open sewage, waste from animals and people, and rotting food. The solution? Herb strewers. These workers had the simple but important job of scattering fragrant herbs like lavender, mint, and rosemary throughout homes, streets, and even royal palaces to improve the air quality. In the grand halls of European royalty, herb strewers were highly valued. King Charles II of England employed a full-time herb strewer to keep the palace smelling fresh. These workers weren't just for luxury, though. People believed that pleasant scents could ward off disease, making this a health-related profession. As plumbing, sanitation, and hygiene drastically improved, cities no longer had the same overwhelming stench. Eventually, scented candles, perfumes, and air fresheners took over the role of herb strewers. Although the job faded away, some royal palaces still use herb strewers today for ceremonial purposes, keeping this medieval tradition alive. While herb strewers focused on making things smell better, the next job was all about writing things down by hand, before printers even existed. Long before printers, every book, contract, and legal document had to be painstakingly copied by hand. Copyists, or scribes, were highly skilled workers who spent years perfecting their handwriting, ensuring perfect spacing and avoiding mistakes. Monks were among the most famous copyists, working in candlelit monasteries, carefully recreating religious texts, literature, and government records. Some books were so complex that it took a single copyist over a year to complete one copy. The invention of the printing press in the 1400s changed everything. Suddenly, books could be mass-produced, making hand copying slow, expensive, and unnecessary. By the 1800s, copyists were almost completely gone. Even today, some religious and legal documents are still hand-copied to preserve tradition, making this profession one of the few ancient jobs that hasn't completely disappeared. From carefully copying texts to dealing with the filthiest job in history, the next profession might be the most disgusting one ever recorded. If you think modern plumbing issues are bad, imagine living in medieval times when human waste had to be manually removed from latrines. That was the job of the gong farmer, a person who cleaned out cesspits and transported human waste far from towns and cities. This work was done exclusively at night, partly because it was so disgusting that people didn't want to see it happening during the day. Gong farmers shoveled tons of human waste, often working in deep pits with toxic fumes that could make them pass out, or worse, kill them. Indoor plumbing and modern sewage systems eliminated the need for human waste collectors. By the 19th century, most cities had developed systems that safely disposed of waste, putting an end to this horrific job. Gong farmers smelled so bad that they were legally banned from living in towns. The stench was unbearable, and they were forced to live in isolated areas outside city walls. The life of a gong farmer was horrible, but at least they were paid well compared to many other medieval workers. Long before phones and instant messaging, telegraph operators were the lifeline of global communication. They worked tirelessly to send and receive Morse code messages, translating them into readable text for businesses, government offices, and even the military. In a time when long-distance communication was slow and unreliable, the telegraph was a groundbreaking invention. Telegraph operators were trained to tap out messages using dots and dashes, ensuring that news, stock market updates, and personal messages traveled across the world in minutes instead of weeks. During times of war, these operators played a crucial role in relaying battlefield intelligence. The Titanic's distress signal, one of the most famous telegraph transmissions in history, was sent by dedicated telegraph operators as the ship was sinking. With the rise of the telephone in the early 20th century, people no longer needed to visit a telegraph office to send messages. By the time the internet and mobile phones arrived, Morse code was virtually extinct. By the early 2000s, most of the world had shut down its last telegraph services. While telegraph operators worked with electronic signals, our next profession relied on delicate glass plates to capture history. Before digital cameras and even film, photography relied on glass plates coated with light-sensitive chemicals. These plates were used in early cameras to capture images, but they had to be carefully developed in dark rooms by skilled photographic plate developers. It was a painstaking job that required precision and patience. The developers had to handle chemicals, time the exposure process perfectly, and ensure that each plate was developed without errors. Unlike modern photography, where a bad shot can be deleted, a mistake in this process meant losing the only copy of a photograph forever. The introduction of film photography in the late 19th century made glass plates obsolete. Film was lighter, more durable, and easier to develop. By the late 20th century, the rise of digital photography completely eliminated the need for darkroom development. While photographic plate developers worked in darkrooms, our next job was all about bright lights, glamour, and socializing. During the 1920s to 1950s, smoking was seen as glamorous and fashionable. In high-end casinos, theaters, and nightclubs, cigarette girls became a symbol of the era. Dressed in stylish uniforms with a tray strapped to their shoulders, these women walked through venues selling cigarettes, cigars, and even small treats. But their job was more than just selling. They were also entertainers, engaging with customers, promoting brands, and adding a touch of Hollywood-style elegance to the atmosphere. In some places, being a cigarette girl was a stepping stone to fame. Many aspiring actresses took on the role in hopes of getting noticed by movie directors or influential figures. As people became aware of the health risks of smoking, public opinion shifted. By the late 20th century, smoking bans in indoor venues made cigarette girls obsolete. Fewer people smoked in public, and cigarette advertising became heavily restricted, making this once iconic job disappear from nightlife culture. Even though cigarette girls have vanished from most places, some upscale events still bring them back, but with a twist. Instead of cigarettes, they now sell candy, cigars, or promotional items, keeping the classic image alive in a healthier way. From the glamorous nightlife of cigarette girls, we now move to a job that was grueling, dangerous, and required raw physical strength. Before indoor plumbing, clean water wasn't as easy as turning on a tap. In cities and villages, water carriers were hired to fetch and deliver water from rivers, wells, or public fountains. These workers carried large buckets or clay pots, making multiple trips daily to ensure that households had enough water for drinking, cooking, and washing. The job was especially common in hot climates where fresh water was scarce, and some water carriers even set up businesses selling water to wealthier customers. For centuries, water carriers were essential for survival, and many cities even had guilds dedicated to the profession. However, as sanitation improved, their work slowly became obsolete. The development of indoor plumbing and citywide water supply systems in the 19th and 20th centuries meant that people no longer needed to hire someone to fetch water. With running water in every home, this once crucial job faded into history. In some developing countries, modern versions of water carriers still exist. Instead of buckets, they now use bicycles, carts, or trucks to transport water to places without reliable plumbing. From carrying life's most essential resource, we now move to a job that was dirty, dangerous, and often done by children. Before gas and electric heating, homes were heated by burning wood or coal in fireplaces. But there was a problem. Soot and ash would build up inside chimneys, causing dangerous fire hazards. That's where chimney sweeps came in. These workers had to climb inside chimneys to scrape off layers of soot, ensuring that smoke could escape safely. The job was filthy, exhausting, and incredibly dangerous. Workers risked getting stuck, inhaling toxic soot, or falling from rooftops. By the early 20th century, central heating systems replaced fireplaces in most homes, reducing the need for chimney sweeps. Even in homes that still use fireplaces, modern chimney cleaning tools have replaced the need for people to physically climb inside. In the 1800s, Orphaned and poor children were forced into this job because their small size allowed them to fit inside narrow chimneys. Many suffered serious health problems or fatal accidents. The practice was eventually banned due to child labor laws. From scaling chimneys to knocking on doors, our next job was all about persuasion and salesmanship. Before malls, TV commercials, and online shopping, the best way to sell products was in person. That's where traveling salesmen came in. Workers who traveled from town to town, selling everything from encyclopedias to vacuum cleaners, cosmetics, and even snake oil. These salesmen carried sample cases, gave live demonstrations, and used persuasive techniques to convince people to buy products they never even knew they needed. Some became legendary figures, known for their fast-talking sales pitches and ability to sell anything to anyone. With the rise of shopping malls, television advertisements, and later, e-commerce, customers no longer needed a door-to-door salesman to show them new products. Most salesmen found their careers disappearing as companies shifted to digital marketing and retail stores. Believe it or not, some traveling salesmen still exist today, especially in niche markets like kitchenware, knives, and custom tools. But their numbers are a tiny fraction of what they once were. From milkmen to chimney sweeps, leech collectors to pin setters, these once essential jobs have now faded into history. Some were replaced by technology, others by safer working conditions, and a few vanished because they were simply no longer needed. But here's something to think about. Will your job exist 50 years from now? Many jobs today, from cashiers to factory workers, are already being replaced by robots and artificial intelligence. Could some of today's careers end up on a list like this in the future? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Click on the next video popping up on your screen for more amazing content.